Every trip needs a great all-weather trench coat. Your road trip ends with a fashion basic for wherever you travel. Today on Fit to Stitch.
Fit to Stitch is made possible in part by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years with innovations in sewing, embroidery, and quilting. Learn more at husqvarnaviking.com. American and Eford, innovators of thread for all your sewing needs, makers of Entressa sewing thread. Learn more at silhouettepatterns.com. Elliott Berman Textiles, manufacturer of fashion fabrics. ElliotTextiles.com.
During this series, we've taken you through just a simple little path to where we can now end up at the trench coat, and you have all the qualifications you need to make a trench coat. And you sit there and you say, no way, no way, but you do. You can stitch straight, you can do a little bit of fitting, we've done well pockets, we've set in a sleeve, you have everything you need. So what we're gonna do is go over the trench coat, and my challenge to you is to make a trench for yourself. I'm gonna give you lots of options, so you can take it to whatever level you want. You can make it as simple or as complex as you want, but I promise you this will really be a fun trip. So let's first start by talking about just the details in a trench coat. This is the first one I made, and I decided I wanted every detail that was in the highest end trench coats out there. So I went to a well-known trench coat maker and I copied every detail. And actually, I even bought the coat. Now, the only reason I bought the coat is because I was in the store for such a long period of time, and the sales clerk said to me, "Can I help you?" And I said, "No, I'm just a pattern maker, and I'm just gonna copy this coat and make a pattern out of it." She says, "Well, why don't you buy it and then bring it back tomorrow?" And I said, "Okay, that's a great idea." Other than that, I wouldn't have. But let's just kind of go over those details. And again, as we go on today, we're going to minimize some of those details, so don't feel like you need to do all of them. But we have a shield in the front. And if you notice, the shield is only on one side. It's a left shield. And truly, the reason that is there is for functionality. As I close up the collar, because this trench coat, remember, is for rain, and we unbutton this, there's another button underneath, and the purpose for this is to literally close that coat up and keep everything dry, and then this button comes back over and closes to this button. So the buttons are purposely placed to literally keep the person dry and the rain out. We don't have to always do those up, and many times I see people all over the city walking, and they certainly don't have that trench coat functioning as it is. There's tabs at the shoulders, and those tabs have buttons, and those purposes are to keep a briefcase or a purse on the shoulder, so you literally don't have to hold it. You can keep your hands clenched, and that will keep that in place as well. There's a back shield, again, for the rain to run off and not to get onto you. There we go. The back pleat, that's for movement and mobility. And then the rest of it is really out of tradition. The buckles, the shields, the belt. If you notice in a trench coat, when you tie a trench coat, it's double-breasted in the middle. Don't tie it over the double-breasted. Come to the side where it's single-breasted, and then that's the best place to actually do the belt. It'll give you less bulk when you're putting on a coat. Not that we're necessarily worried about that bulk, but it'll help us look a little bit thinner. All right, so those are all the fun details of a trench coat. Notice the collar has a band, and that band generally has stitching on it. We'll show you how to do that and how to, it doesn't help the collar stay up. Remember, it's a full roll collar. We know that now by looking at the center back and recognizing that the collar comes up and then covers itself. So it's a full roll collar. It'll stand up all by itself, but traditionally trench coats have some stitching on the under collar that we'll add to just for fun. And then you notice there's a wide hook and eye there that keeps that collar, and again, its function. As we go to other trench coats, you see that they get a lot away from that function. So it doesn't have to be there. This is a raglan sleeve, so I don't have to have that set-in sleeve. I can do it another way if you're a little nervous about doing that set-in sleeve. Even though, remember, you're tie interfacing, it's real simple. You can always come in with a raglan. They're a little bit easier to do. Once you make one, this fabric cost me a whole $10. And I took it to my dry cleaners and I had it waterproofed. So this fabric will function just as waterproof fabric will. So almost any dry cleaner out there can do what they call waterproofing fabric. You just take the fabric to them before you start, or just talk to them in general and they'll kind of give you directions as to what's the best way. So my $10 trench coat was a real savings for me. Then I decided to play with some different fabrics. And here I wanted to switch textures around. So again, you really want to come up with what works best for you. And when you use another fabric, especially if it's as wild as this one, you'll probably not want a lot of it. Not necessarily the collars. You know, you don't want to look like a bear. You just want to look like there's some accent pieces on there. So be careful with that. So the first thing I want to do then, after we know all our details, is I want to talk about the fit in a trench coat. And the reason I think it's such a great product and project for you is because there's very little fit involved. If you have a jacket that you've made and you feel comfortable with that jacket, and you, like I said, you've made it in the past, then the only thing I would do is I would take that pattern and make it into a trench coat. The trench coat is a double-breasted pattern. So what we mean by double-breasted is just simply that if you notice and close it up, here's center front, and the trench coat front comes past center front. Now, always in rules of patterns, whenever you do a double-breasted, you don't go past the other side. So what that means is, here's my center front. I can do a double-breasted, but I don't want to go past the dart on the other side. So most double-breasted items are about 3.5 inches lapped to the other side, and that's because the bust points are 4 inches from center front. So I could take my other pattern, recognize where center front is, and simply create the double-breasted look by duplicating that front and making it again. Now remember, when I do this, I've got to add a seam allowance to it. But I'm going to discard this side, and I'm going to use this piece twice. And that's all I need to do. So if you're a little nervous about buying a trench coat pattern or starting from scratch, and you have a jacket that you've made and you're comfortable with that jacket, then go ahead and do that. Or vice versa. If you've got a double-breasted and you just want to add the details to it, you could certainly use that as well. The armhole, I think, is something that we struggle with sometimes. We want to make sure that armhole works, and this is where we've talked a little bit about different size armholes. So if I know the armhole, and generally, again, I have 4 armholes, and that's my sleeveless armhole, my t-shirt armhole, my blouse armhole, and my jacket armhole. And usually my jacket armhole is my largest, and that's what I want to use with my trench coat. So this is a copy of my jacket armhole. There's my jacket armhole. That's all I need. I can look and place it onto my pattern, and remember, I start at the shoulder and go to the side seam. So I could quickly see that if I use this armhole that's on this particular pattern, it would simply be too small. If I buy a pattern and the shoulders are just too wide for me because I buy it for my bust, I can always decide where I want that armhole to be, and let's say I want to narrow the armhole, and then still pivot it out to the side seam, and that's my armhole. All right, so the fitting is very simple. You know all the details. Let's go to the sewing machine and let's look and see what we can do and the parts. So I've kind of collected all these parts here, and we're going to go over and stitch on the sewing machine. And while we're doing that, we're going to start with the shield. So I've talked a little bit about seam allowances, and that 3/8 inch seam allowance is your best friend. And it really, truly is. So there's the shield. I've made it. Remember, there's only one, and when you cut it out, you're going to need 2 of those pieces. So this is the neckline, and this is the armhole. Those are not even stitched on. The only thing I'm stitching is this portion right here. Whenever I do my stitching, my foot, and I always use this little Teflon foot, I love it, because the width of it where my needle is 3/8 of an inch. So all I'm doing is literally stitching around that curve and then all the way to the end. So that's it. And I actually stitched in yellow on this side so you could see. Because I can't invert a curve like this without trimming it, because if I do, it'll bulk all up on the inside, I'm going to actually trim this down to 1/8 of an inch. Just around the corner is the only part I need to trim. And when you talk about different fabrics, you know, the greatest thing I think about trench coats today is they're in every fabric out there. They're certainly not just trench coat fabric or raincoat fabric. We wear trench coats now all year round, so a lot of them are out of wool. The trench coat is probably the black dress of coats. It's so classic that you just really can't go wrong in doing it. Okay, so remember this goes on the left-hand side of the coat, so this is going to be the top side. You're going to press it. I'm not even going to do that, because sometimes in pressing, it's really a little bit easier to not press it, and I'll tell you why. Because this one seam will naturally go to the back side. The only part I would probably worry about is this curve, because what I don't want it to be, I want it to be a curve, and I don't want it to be kind of square at any point. So I'm going to naturally pull this down a little bit more, because I want to roll the seam just slightly to the back, and I'm going to top stitch. And I'm going to top stitch about a 1/4 of an inch from the side. And again, just let that go around, and it'll do all your work for you. I did top stitch there, you notice, in the same color. That's the back side. I just wanted you to see the stitching there. And then I can go in and press, and there you have your shield. So this is just easy stuff, but I got a few tips for you I want to show you on some other pieces. If you decide you want to do these tabs, there's a few tabs. There's 2 tabs on the shoulders, and then this is also the way you do the buckle. The buckle on the sleeves, and then also the belting. It's all done with this pointed end. So when you do that, you're actually not going to stitch all the sides. You're just going to stitch 3 sides. And when you stitch, we'll show you here, you're going to overstitch. So notice here, I'm actually stitching off. Then when I stitch the next section, I'm going to cross those stitches. And you can see there, don't leave your needle down and turn directions, because you're less likely to get that seam allowance accurate. Just go ahead and cross the stitching and then a different direction, and then stitch one side. All right, so there where I've stitched the one side, leave one side open, even if it's a belt, even if it's a long way, because I can't get to the point if I've got this side closed. So then I'm going to fold my stitches just like I learned before. I do 1, I do 2, and then I can reach in and grab that point and flip it to the right side. Also on this little corner right there, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fold that corner as well, so that when I bring it to the outside, it will fold nicely and be flat. So all of those will be done inside. When you've finished this, this is going to be longer because I haven't turned my seam allowance in. So this is a real easy way to make sure your point is accurate, because now what I'm going to do is turn that side in. I can press it, but I'll turn it in until these 2 points are the same. So if one is lower, that means I need to turn the seam allowance in just a little bit more. And this is a really easy way to get this accurate without stitching on the inside and having to try to get down to that point. Just leave one side open. Let me get this thread out of here. And then I'm going to go in and top stitch. Now that I can see those 2 points are the same, now I'm free to top stitch. And again, I would press and then top stitch. But again, my top stitching, I want to be about 1/4 of an inch. Remember, my seam allowances are 3/8. So I want to top stitch less than my seam allowance to hold that in place. Whenever I'm top stitching, I do need to come to the appropriate place, lift it up, turn it. And when I do that, if I leave a mark on my foot to where I'm following, I've got a little mark on this foot, and I'm just following that mark. So I know exactly when to turn it when I've reached that point. And if you notice how easy it is to sew through all those layers, and it's because they're folded inside. Don't trim away. because if you trim away, a lot of times when you trim, there's like a little divot inside there, and so it just doesn't show up as well. So there's that top stitch point, and now I can go ahead and press. Okay, let's try another thing. I want to do belt loops. There are 4 belt loops. I know that doesn't sound like very many, but there's only 4 belt loops on a trench coat. One of the belt loops, let me show you this collar, is actually at the collar. And you might say, gee, that's an interesting place for it. And it is, but that's because it's how you hang the trench coat. So 1 belt loop is there, and there's only 3 belt loops on the coat itself, and they're at the side seams. The actual last belt loop is on the belt itself. So it's a sliding carrier, and it can be moved wherever you want the belt to be or wherever you want the belt loop to be. And that's just simply so you can adjust it to cinch in to fit the waist. So in this case, the belt loops are not hard, but I'm going to suggest to you that you use the selvage. And that way you don't even have to finish one edge of the belt loop. As you fold and then fold over it, you're just going to top stitch this. So I didn't have to do any finish on that belt at all. And I'm going to have a matching thread. I'm right down the middle. And then that selvage is holding at the end. You're going to turn the ends in, and that's when you're going to finish off your belt in every case. So don't even worry about that right now. There's your little belt loop. So see, it's kind of fun just making all these little parts, and we're just going to put all these little parts together. All right, so let's focus on the collar. That's a very visual part of the trench coat, and I think a lot of people are really nervous about it. There's my finished collar. Again, simply because the nature of the pieces, the parts will actually stand up all by themselves. So we don't really have to worry about them standing up. Whenever I do the trench coat, I have a lining on the back side. I don't have 2 pieces of fashion fabric for the collar. Again, unless you want to, but generally because the trench coat fabric is a little heavier, there's something lighter on the back side. There's not really a need to use any interfacing because the collar itself will stand up, and generally the fabric itself is fairly heavy. So I don't think really interfacing is necessary. And I'm going to put right sides together on my collar. This is another case where I really want to make sure that the 2 layers are correct. So you don't have to, I'm not a big pinner. You probably have noticed that by now. I'm not a big pinner, but just something to keep it in place. The nice thing is that you have a flat surface. And so I'm just, again, going to do right sides together. And I'm using the edge of my foot as I go around the corner to make sure that corner is actually a corner. Or to make sure it's actually curved. I don't want it to be pointed. My hands just hold it in place as I come around. Alrighty. Then again, we're going to trim those down to 1/8 of an inch because those wider areas won't invert themselves. If it's not actually curved around that corner, it really needs to be done again. Otherwise, you won't get a nice curve. You'll get a little bit of a point at the end of that curve. And because I'm going to top stitch this, I want to make sure that those curves are repeated for themselves. So there's no folding on this because there's no point. It's a curve. Certainly, the trench coat collar, you know, just like we talked about collars and duplicating them and making different looks, there's no reason I couldn't make it pointed. And what we see, especially I think as any trend like this becomes very popular, we get a lot of variables. There's lots of variables in trench coats out there today. I think some of the tried and traditional trench coat makers will make you believe that they have to be one way, but certainly we know that's not the case. All right, so my lining is definitely going to be lighter than my fashion fabric that I'm using to make the trench coat. So it's really easy to kind of just make it in place and go from there. And we're going to do that. If a corner like this, that particular one won't fold out, that means that I really need to come back and trim this a little bit closer. Because it's a tight curve, we need to slow down. Slow down and trim. And then when I pull it back out, I should get the curve that I need to. That makes all the difference, and it just lays down there now. Okay, now we're going to top stitch. You're going to top stitch from the right-hand side, and that's just simply because you can see what you're doing. And I want to tuck under the lining. So again, just pick your point. I'm picking a 1/4 inch from the edge because I've decided to keep that same consistency all throughout my coat. And that's the only thing I would do, is I would keep that consistency all throughout your coat. And then again, just tuck this under as you're sewing. Not any different than the shield we did. And you can see, there we have it. Now see, that point is a little bit more pointed than it should be. I probably should have trimmed that. But you can see there's my top stitching from there. And I'm not even going to stitch the rest of it, but because I do want to make sure that we do the stand. So we'll just press that and leave that. The collar in and of itself, every single time we do this collar, it's sandwiched. There isn't anything that's a notch lapel where we feel like it's a little more complex or difficult. Notice the stand is simply sandwiched in between. So we're going to take those stand pieces, and whenever you have the stand pieces, we put them right sides together. The longer side of this, if you notice, is actually the neck edge. So the shorter edge is what we're going to put onto this collar. So we're going to put the right sides together there, and we're going to put this collar in between. This is going to go there, and I need to leave a seam allowance out so that I have room for the end there. And then just give it a little bit of pinning just to make sure that the two corners, that the two ends are actually accurate. I don't really pin the middle as much as I worry about are the ends. Whenever you're working with a neck edge, it's all bias. So I've got a lot of flexibility in between, and a lot of women will say to me, but I cut it just perfectly, and it's just not right. It's not that it's not right, it's just that because they're bias edges, I get a lot of movement when I'm shifting from the sewing machine even to from the table where I cut. So don't feel like it's you, the bias is just giving a little bit of movement. So pin the edges what they need to be correct first, and then I can go ahead and give this a little bit of tugging or pulling or gently if I need it to be right in between. Okay, so there I have the seam allowance, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch the collar length first. Let me just make sure you understand where I'm at. This is just the neckband, which is right here, and I've got the collar in between. So that long edge is going to go down, and I'm just going to literally zip right along that neck edge. Same seam allowance that I've used before. And whenever I want to, I always just kind of give it a little bit of a tug, and I can pull that down. All right. Then when I do that end, I'll just do one end so you can see it. I'm going to start right at the base of that collar and go out from there, so that when I go to fold it, I can fold that, turn it, and it comes out again exactly flat. Sorry, fold, fold, keep your finger there as you turn it, and then you can see that comes all the way down. So it's really easy to make that joint and that union. It's not a difficult, it's all just straight lines, and that's why I said in the very beginning, all we have to do is get those straight lines together, and it's going to be really fun. Let's go back to the table for just a minute, and let's just cover some additional basics here. So once I finish this stand, I can sew just horizontal lines in there, and it's not for any purpose. The collar will stand up just nicely without a single tiny stitch on there. So don't feel like you have to do it. Just if you'll notice in trench coats that you'll see sometimes where it is stitched like that. You can do a hook and eye in the middle if you want to hold that together. Again, all these things are optional. When you set in the sleeve in the shoulder pad, the sleeve in the trench coat does not have a shoulder pad, but it still is a jacket size sleeve. So a lot of people say to me, well, don't I need a bigger sleeve for a trench coat? You don't, because your jacket has a shoulder pad and your trench coat doesn't. It will feel like a bigger armhole without it actually being bigger. And if you go too large in armholes, they'll really begin to pull, and they're not appropriate. So that's why in the beginning we used your jacket armhole. If you go back a couple shows, we did use the tie interfacing. We showed you how to set that in. And I want to show you this jacket. This jacket I love. It is a trench coat. I did exactly use the same pattern, but I left off all the little doodads. There's no buckles at the sleeve. There's no sheath here. There's no shoulder tabs. I didn't even put the pleat in the back, which remember we learned how to do that pleat. I simply wanted a coat, a winter coat. It's wool, so like I said earlier, we have so many different fabrics when we're dealing with trench coats that it's really fun to just simply find a fabric that we really like, that works for us, and then put the parts together. The belt and the buckles, you'll have a lot of fun finding little tiny belts and buckles where you can go. You can go online and really get perfect little buckles for what you need. And simply you make the belt, slip it through, and do a little stitch. So do have fun with your trench coats. I know that you completely are ready to do this project. Let's do it. Thanks so much for joining us this series on Fit to Stitch. Remember that sewing really is just like driving a car. Remember when that parallel parking was just miserable? And now we start to teach others how they can parallel park their car. Sewing is just terrific. Thanks again for being here. Remember, life is not about what you have, but about what you share.
Visit fittostitch.com for all of the patterns and instructions found on today's show, plus more tutorials, webcasts, and techniques from this season of Fit to Stitch. This is show 313. If you enjoyed today's show and want to learn more about fitting with Peggy Sagers, a DVD set of all 13 episodes of Fit to Stitch is available at fittostitch.com for $49.99 plus shipping. Fit to Stitch is made possible in part by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years with innovations in sewing, embroidery, and quilting. Learn more at husqvarnaviking.com. American and Eford, innovators of thread for all your sewing needs, makers of Entressa sewing thread. Learn more at silhouettepatterns.com. Elliott Berman Textiles, manufacturer of fashion fabrics. elliottbermantextiles.com.